They missed the trick out of placing him up under the tour. So it wasn't I'd love to see it. I wouldn't mind going in the jacket. It's everywhere.
You've got lots of fun.
Right, welcome back everybody. I hope you all enjoyed that.
We're not washing it up.
Feel free to grab any more food because it's all been paid for and eating it is probably the best thing to do. So welcome back to the afternoon session. As I said, again I will remind you, if you have to dash out early, please fill out your feedback sheet and leave it on the desk where you signed in. And hopefully we've had everybody who has arrived, we've ticked off and signed you in so I know who's here today, which is absolutely wonderful. One quick other housekeeping session is anybody who wants to share a taxi back to the railway station, do you want to put your hands up if you need a taxi back to the railway station? Because Emma does, and she's seeing getting anyone together who wants to share a taxi.
No, I don't. I'm very tipsy usually.
Okay.
You can have a taxi back to Birmingham if you like.
Brilliant, right. So, to start our afternoon slot off, we're going to do some water today. We've got Rob from Wicksteed first up. I would like to invite Rob from Wicksteed up first. Come on.
Hello.
And I would like to thank Rob very much indeed.
Yeah, saves me the walk.
I would like to thank Rob very much
It's not the open spaces way.
because Wicksteed
Absolutely.
are being very wonderful and are helping to give a little bit of sponsorship money towards this event. So, a big thank you to Rob from Wicksteed.
That's quite all right. I'm so pleased to be here because my passion in life is parks and open spaces. I was formerly Park Services Manager for Bromsgrove District Council. That's kind of why I got into this kind of industry. What I do for Wicksteed? Well, I sell. I design and I sell play equipment essentially. But things have progressed over the years. We not just do play areas, we do outdoor gyms, we do multi-use games areas, do skate parks and the like. More importantly for this forum, what we do is a lot of pre-budget work, which means that we'll do a nice big poster for you, free of charge, which you can put in your community hall or something, and consult children upon it. So we do a lot of those sort of things. More importantly, we're a friendly team, and we'll give you some really sound advice on perhaps where you can get funding from, how you can get design information from, and we'll provide all that support information for nothing. So we're here. We're a free resource. Come and use us, and leave your name and address, and I'll get you some information through the post.
Thank you.
Next, we've got Jane from Hales Owen. You're right there, Jane.
Yes.
Yeah. Project.
Okay. A few of us got together in 2006, decided to clear up the dump, which is our park, and in 2009 we got some funding and followed the wish list from everybody in the area, and we've now got a nice healthy park. We've got people who come to the park, we've got toddlers, babies, and we've got people in their 80s come for a Tuesday afternoon session and this and that and what have you, and have a walk around the park as well. Future plans are with the two local schools, we're planting more bulbs, little trees that are coming in sometime in the near future, and well, it's a lovely open space, it really is. Everybody's so pleased, and we've got cookery classes there as well, you name it, for healthy eating, and well, it's changed everybody's lives in the area. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Chris, tell
Hello, friends of Telford Town Park. We're now into our 13th year and we must be doing something right because along with the Town Council and the Park Management we've just achieved Green Flag Award, and not only that, we voted 18th out of 1,500 parks nationally, so we're really chuffed with that. We do all sorts of different events in the park along with other things like hedge laying, scrub clearance, gardening in the formal gardens even now we help out in. Last year our crowning glory probably was the reinstatement due to redevelopment of a sensory garden, which has proved very popular indeed, and that was done with the considerable help of lottery money, because the whole thing came to about £26,000. So we're very chuffed about that. The park is very, very popular. It attracts people from all over the Midlands and sometimes beyond, and attracts something like 600,000 visitors a year. Thank you.
Oh, another Chris Collingswood.
Oh, that's me. Sorry, yeah, Chris Turley. As I mentioned earlier, I am the Borough Council, but apart from that, I've recently taken over as interim chair of the Friends of Hollingswood and Randley Valley, which is steeped in history. It has been going for some while, but it foundered a bit, but so hopefully we're having a first meeting next week and start building it up again. But we did have an event a couple of weeks ago at which 20 children came along. We got self-assembled bird boxes. They put their names on them, and obviously the next thing we'll be taking the children into the valley to put the bird boxes up. We're having a walk, and at a week or so's time, hopefully we'll get lots of more people. But the main thing for me is saving the valley, because it was earmarked years ago for building, but that's now been removed. It's had previous industrial use, it's got ancient woodland, and also I've liaised with another group, Seven Wars Countryside Trust, and we're going to have use of their volunteers to do some work in the valley.
Right, next I've got Jim from the Coventry Tree Warden Network, which sounds fascinating.
Good afternoon. 2 years ago, Coventry City Council was looking to get a tree warden group set up in Coventry, and a number of interested people went to a tree warden forum in Warsaw and found it very interesting. So in early 2014, we produced a constitution and set up a website. In the early days, obviously funding is an issue. We went to Simon Batten from the Voluntary Action Coventry, who was very helpful, and did get a grant from the Coventry City Council. Membership was a drive in 2014. In 2014-15, worked with the City Council planting and maintaining some areas. We work with a number of the local friends groups and have walks and talks, and now looking at starting some orchard projects for 2016.
We've got a few more on the list. We've got the 5 on the list, but I suggest we move on to the next slot so we don't get too far behind, and we'll do the last 5.
We'll fit them in.
We'll fit them in.
Don't worry, we'll fit them in. Right, I now would like to hand over. Let's go, wait a minute, and being one's own IT. Right, I would like to hand over to Simon Batten, who is
We heard about what you can do.
who is very kindly come today from Voluntary Action in Coventry. Yeah, I've got that right, yes.
Right, yeah.
And he's going to come and do a good talk all about funding, which is dear to all our hearts. Thank you. Do you want me to sit here and move it on for you?
No, that's fine.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Simon.
Thank you. There will be a small sort of brown envelope on its way to Jim as well. That's always a good sort of starting point from my perspective. I am the Funding Advice and Group Support Officer for Voluntary Action Coventry. So it's just great to see so many people actually here today in the room. It's great to see the spread of groups as well, because I think one of the important aspects of my role is to bring organisations we work with together. One of the things that we find, particularly through the training and the networking sessions that we learn, is that you can learn as much from each other as you can actually learn from me, from that point of view. I have around about 20 years experience, so very similar to yourselves. I was involved in a community organisation when I was sort of 21. The first school I went to was going to be flattened and turned into a car park. So that kind of motivated me to actually get involved in my local community. The space had quite extensive sort of playing fields and community gardens and that side of things. And we were able to turn it into a multi-purpose community site which incorporated the community garden, which grew the food that was actually used in the community cafe. And I worked for Coventry City Council as well. I know there's some people from local authorities here today as well. So I worked within regeneration, and I've worked on doorstep green projects, I've worked on pocket parks, I've worked on allotments, I've worked on larger parks. So I've worked across a range of sort of green space projects. And I think that they tend to be those types of projects which perhaps people within local communities feel most connected to. And I think one of the things that I'll be talking about today is probably in terms of resources. So funding is a means to an end, but one of your most important resources, and something that people sometimes forget, is actually people. So the people you get involved in the longer term will actually be what ensures that your projects are successful. So funding tends to provide you with a bit of a boost and enables you to get things done, but it's really about people making things happen. And I think this quote kind of sums it up. Whatever you dream you can do, begin it. Boldness has genius, power and magic in it. Begin it now. And one of the things I took from my education, one of the things I always remember is that I had a chemistry teacher. I didn't learn a great deal about chemistry, but one of the things he taught me was, if you're not sure where to start, just start. So I think we're talking about organisations. You remember back to when you started and how significant some of what you were trying to achieve actually seemed. And I think one of the things that's really, really important to remember is that you aren't isolated or alone. There are other people trying to achieve similar things. And one of the things that's really, really important in terms of, from a funding perspective, is to actually understand the market that you're working in. So the marketplace is all of the organisations you see here today. Those organisations can help you in a number of ways. They can actually help you save money. They may have resources that they can make available to you, or they may have expertise and skills that you can benefit from. So that's something I'd like you to kind of bear in mind as we go through this brief session today. I'm also, I have a bit of a self-interest as well, because I'm also director of a community interest company, and we deliver community events, supply events equipment. And where the majority of those events actually take place are in some of the parks and green spaces that you're responsible for maintaining and looking after. So it's in my interest to ensure that those parks look the best that they can from that point of view. You will find Voluntary Action Coventry has been around since 1957. We are a member-led organisation, so our Board of Trustees is drawn from our members, and some of those members are here with us today. Tim actually sits on our board as well. So if you'd like to know a bit more about the organisation, he's a good person to talk to. My role is to support organisations from the cradle to the grave. So I support groups to constitute, to put in place appropriate structures for what you want to achieve, to develop policies, procedures, to deal with governance issues, and to develop projects. So where we start from is project development. We don't start by looking for funding. We start by developing the projects that you want to achieve first. So that's kind of where we start from. There's an idea of being funding-led rather than being funding fed, and that's that you develop your idea to fit the funding available. In the longer term, that approach isn't, from experience, sustainable. What we want to support you to do is to find the funding which feeds the ideas you have and makes those ideas possible and a reality. What I'm looking to cover quickly for you today is, by the end of the session, to ensure that you can understand a bit more about how to prepare a strong funding application, be more aware of where to look for funding, and have an improved awareness of the range of funds currently available. Now, I can't cover everything in the time we've got. There are over 4,000 trusts and foundations that provide support. Not all of those are focused on the areas you're working in, but the good news is that the environment is a priority for a large number of funds. So that does give you quite a lot to go at from that point of view. In terms of where we're going to start, one of the first things you need to do before you go for funding is actually ensure that what you want to do, your constitution allows you to do. Your constitutional governing document, if you are a incorporated organisation, so you're registered with Companies House, you trade, you will have articles of association, but effectively that's the set of rules that define how you run your organisation. Within your constitution, it will define whether or not you are actually able to apply for funding or to hold funding. For the vast majority of constitutions, that's fine, there's no problems. There are one or two structures where there may be, you need to look at that in a bit more detail. But normally that is on the first or second page of your constitution. So funders will always request your constitution in general, so it's important you've read it and made that check first. We generally then require that organisations look at agreeing the project plan. Your project plan needs to answer the questions of who is going to be involved in the project, what are they going to do, so what activities are you going to undertake, why are you doing those activities, so what's the purpose, what are you trying to achieve through doing it, why is it important, how do you know that it's actually needed in your area, when are you going to do it, so what are the timescales? If it needs to happen next week, then there's an awful lot of funds that won't be relevant for you, or your fundraising needs to be tailored in a particular way depending on the timescale you're working to. Where is the funding going to take place? Is it going to be across one site? Is it going to be across split sites? What's the nature of the environment you're going to be working in, and what are the risks inherent in doing that work? One of the gentlemen earlier was just saying that he was working in a disused quarry. You know, before you start that work, you'll have risk assessed it to actually make sure that the space was safe to undertake work within. And probably the most important question, how are you actually going to do the work? So there's lots of options open for you. What a project plan does is brings groups together to actually explore what they want to achieve. It's really important that you actually have agreed, or at least discussed, what you're trying to do beforehand. A group or a constituted organisation is collectively, not individually responsible. You tend to find with a lot of projects that those projects are driven by one or two key individuals, but it's really important, and funders look to see that those individuals are bringing the rest of the group and the rest of the community with them. So that's something that's really, really important to draw out, and really important to actually to be able to demonstrate that, whether that's through meetings, community consultation, or otherwise. Defining the need for your project. So most funding bids or applications, or if you're doing a drive for donations, you need to be clear about the problems you're trying to solve with the work that you want to do. What are the issues? Is it antisocial behaviour? Is it fly tipping? Is it that the site isn't usable? Is it pollution, that the site's polluted and can't be used for that reason? So it's defining what the issues are that you're actually trying to tackle first. need for the project is supported by the evidence of the need for your project. So it's not enough to say, I think this is a good idea because there's a need for this within my community. You need to actually be able to demonstrate that need. And again, that's through community consultation. If you have 150 people saying there's a need for something, that's a lot more compelling than having 1 or 2 people saying that they want something done with the space outside their house. So it needs to be about wider benefit from that point of view, and you need to be able to demonstrate that. There will be research, consultation, statistics. There's a very good report that's just come out from the Heritage Lottery Fund on the impact of their Part of the People programme that actually does a lot of your work for you. So you can actually quote those types of research in the applications that you're developing. So part of my role is to make organisations aware of the research that's out there, and it actually says very clearly in terms of what the outputs of people being involved with green space are. You need to work out what activities you need to undertake to actually deliver the solution. So the activities are the step-by-step process you go through to achieve your objectives. So you identify what the problems are. When you talk about activities, or if funder asks you about what are you going to do, it's that step-by-step process. And that's the bit that people quite often fall down on. They don't think about it in terms of, I always think of it in terms of if you were going to cook a meal for a friend, what were the steps you need to actually follow to cook that meal? You need to decide what recipe you're going to use. You need to go out and shop for ingredients. You need a cooker. You need gas. You need pots and pans. So there's a lot more steps involved in even simple processes than people quite often realise. And there is a relationship between the activities you undertake and the project budget and resources you need to deliver the project. And what we find quite often is that people underestimate the resources they're actually going to need to undertake a project. And it's not just about the immediate capital works, it's also about, I was talking to Tim about resource funding as well. It's also about being able to resource that project in the longer term. So it's thinking about those two things together. If there is stuff that you identify in the budget which isn't explained in the activities, the odds are the funder will lose confidence in your application at that stage. So it's really, really important that you relate the activities to the budget. And the budget should be about the resources you need. One of the things that we found that people quite often underestimate is that volunteer time, on average, based on European figures, is worth £11.09 per hour. That's the figure they use at the moment. So if you think about the time of all the people in the group today, I'm presuming nobody's being paid to be here. You've got, 50, 60 people all spending 6 hours at £11 an hour. That's quite a lot of time financially to actually have. And now if you think of it in terms of your projects, you think about how many hours of time you actually put in. That time has a value, and you need to actually reflect that value within your applications. Because you may be asking for £5,000, but you're actually providing £50,000 worth of volunteer time. So in that context, a request for 5,000 isn't really that much money to be asking for when you're doing the majority of the work yourself. So it's really, really important you don't undersell that. And all those things that people provide free of charge, perhaps somebody drives tools and equipment to the site for free. If you'd have had to hire a van, it's £5 a day. So there's quite a lot you're probably doing in terms of resources that probably isn't covered or reflected within your bid. And fundraising is about selling your idea or selling your concept. It is a sales exercise, and it is regrettably a competitive process. I understand some of the groups were talking this morning about some of the trends from some of the businesses that provide funding, people like West. where it is very much a competitive process. It's rather like the X factor of funding, where 100 groups bid in, but only one will be successful. I'm not overly keen on that particular approach, but that is the market you're in. So it's really, really important that you can actually present your project fully, and that you can show the full value of what you offer. Because that extra volunteer time could be the difference between your project and another 10 projects being funded. So it's really, really important in terms of understanding your unique selling point and what makes you different as an organisation. You also need to understand who will benefit from your project, who your beneficiaries are. So who are you doing it for? Once you've done it, who's going to use that space that you've been working on? How are they going to use it? And what benefit are they actually going to get from it? Are they going to be using it once a week? Are they going to be using it every day? Again, that's a way of kind of differentiating your project. If you've got hundreds of people using it, then you want to be saying that. You also need to be able to explain the change that comes about as a result of your project. So this is where we talk about outcomes. So there are two types of measures of how successful a project is. And these days, there is a lot more emphasis on the impact of your project. There are some brilliant projects which don't get funded because they can't demonstrate the difference their project has made, or they've had funding in the past, but they didn't evaluate or monitor the difference they made successfully. So the next time they go for funding, they can't show how far they've travelled. And it's that idea of distance travelled that is really, really, really important from that point of view. You need to be able to show what a difference you've made to people at an individual level, what a difference you've made at a family level, and also at a community level as well. So it's not just having a great park which is available for the community to use. It's about how that person who uses it to run and exercise every morning, who's improved their health and well-being to the point they've extended their life expectancy by 5 to 7 years. That's an individual benefit, and it's those stories you need to be telling. So it's not just before and after photos, it's about the use that space is put to. That's what funders are looking to see from that point of view. You need to be clear as well in terms of how you're actually going to monitor and evaluate your project. If it isn't clear that you've got strong systems in place, particularly financial systems, you will be considered a risk. If you're asking for a lot of money from somebody, if you think about it, if it was your money and you were loaning it to somebody to do something, you want some reassurance that they were going to spend on it in the right way, and that the money would be used for the purposes for which it was given. So that, again, is an opportunity to actually show, if you've got a track record of successful delivery, which I suspect many of the organisations in the group have got, tell them about that. That's the type of thing they want to hear. And again, it's that type of thing that sets you out. If you're a newer group, but the individuals in your group have been involved in successful projects in the past, again, tell people about that. That's something that's really, really important from that point of view. There's a phrase the lottery uses at the moment, which is kind of in vogue, which is about telling the story. So it's about understanding your journey and the process, and having a minute to do that is great practice actually. I'm quite glad I'm not doing something on that basis, but very impressed that you can actually do it in a minute. And actually the equivalent of what you've just done in a minute is quite often what you're asked to do in a funding application. So if you can do it standing up here today with an audience, then you can also do it in an application that gives you 50 to 200 words. But it is about understanding where you started from, where you got to, and where you're going. And actually being able to explain that, and you being clear, and collectively being clear about that. And it's also about understanding, what does success look like? Is this an open-ended commitment you're making, or is it a task and finish where you've got a defined start and end point? For most funding, projects are based on a defined start and end point. They want to understand what happens next and where you go afterwards. And again, it is very much about being able to identify your end goal, if that makes sense. If you aren't clear about that, then it's less likely you'll be successful within any bid. We are working in perhaps the most challenging environment we've seen in the voluntary sector. I mean, I've worked in the sector for 20 years, and this is the most challenging period we've seen. Demand for financial support and the number of groups supporting that support is actually increasing. The level of donations, and it's interesting to see Children in Need last night, it's 37 million. That's at odds with what's happening across the sector. The level of donations is actually declining, sadly, within the last 2 to 3 years. So it's harder to get support from people because people have less money. The grant funding from local and national government is also not there. So where previously local authorities were able to support and national government was supporting, that support isn't there on the level it was before. When I worked in regeneration, we had a lot of geographical programs, many of which focused on environmental projects. Those projects really don't exist in the same context anymore. So that means you are now competing on a regional or national level rather than competing on a neighbourhood level. The quality of bids has also increased as well. So people have got better at doing funding bids. So there is much more emphasis on you actually submitting something which stands out and is different. If you aren't successful, one of the really, really key things is it doesn't mean you haven't produced a good bid. It just means somebody else produced a better bid. Key thing from my experience is not to give up when somebody says no. As in most things in life, and I'm sure you found this with your projects, if you'd have accepted every time somebody said no, you can't do it, nothing would have happened. So you have to keep going, and it is a road, and it is a journey, and there will be disappointments during that process. But the majority of organisations we've worked with have got there in the end. It's about finding the right funding for you, and it sounds terrible, but it's a bit like a dating service in terms of the service I provide. What you are looking to find is you are clear about what you want to achieve. You are looking to find somebody who wants to support the same things and is aligned with you in terms of your goals and your aims. So part of the role of officers like myself, and there are councils for voluntary service, Hereford, Worcester, Sandwell, BVSC in Birmingham, Dudley CVS, whose role, we are independent in principle and we work for our members. So we are there to support you, to try and help you to find the right things for you. The key thing for me is you don't waste time submitting bids to funds where you're not going to be successful. That's about engaging with funders, sharing your project ideas at an early stage and allowing them to actually shape what you deliver. So we'll look at Heritage Lottery very, very shortly, but the Heritage Lottery Fund have a development officer team. The landfill tax have grants managers who are responsible for specific areas. They will work with you before your bid goes to panel to change the bid and shape it to make sure it's got the best chance of being successful. So our role is really, really important in terms of making that introduction. So in Coventry, I will actually take the landfill tax programme managers to visit the sites, to introduce them to projects, to actually facilitate that. So when that bid comes across their desk, they visually understand what that project looks like and what the space looks like. So they've got that in their heads. And again, that's a way, quite a simple way, of actually differentiating it. But if they're looking at a tray of 50 applications, they'll remember your application, and that's the basis we kind of work on from that point of view. One of the really, really important things is, in the way you write it and the way you communicate, if you don't come across as passionate and committed to your project, nobody else is going to get excited about your project. So it's also really, really important from experience. to get somebody else to actually act as a sounding board for you and review a bit you've written. Because it's not about what you want to say, it's about generally answering the questions that have been asked. In terms of where you look for funding, there are some sources which are available. Again, local authorities in the past, I'm not sure if it's quite as true now, but there is a West Midlands local authority funding officers network where the funders meet directly with officers from local authorities and also from council for voluntary service and other infrastructure organisations, and they give us feedback or heads up about funds which are coming out. So if you're from a local authority, you may or may not have a funding officer, but in theory they should know a bit more about the level of applications into a fund at a given time and whether there are particular things that funders are looking for from that point of view. But all 4,000 trusts and foundations are actually listed in grant funding directories, which are hard copies, and they're quite often provided by your local libraries as well. And there are a number of books, some of which specialise in particular areas, like the environment, and they are basically a listing of all the different funders. They list who the funders are, how much money they have, what their eligibility criteria are, what type of projects they're looking to fund and what their priorities are, and how you get in contact with them. There's a bit more information than that, but those directories are there. I quite regularly have groups come to my offices to actually use those directories, and that's something we facilitate. There is a charge for those services, and we provide that service free, but you can buy the books yourself if you feel you don't have a need for them. Generally, you use them once or twice. So we recommend that if you can borrow them, because they cost upwards of £95 to £100. It's easier to borrow than spend them for a one-off purpose. There are a number of funding search databases as well. The best of them, sadly, used to be called Funder Finder. Unfortunately, the government introduced Funding Central, which is a free service, and it put Funder Finder out of business. Which wasn't quite what they were intending to do. But the best service, and one that you can actually access yourselves free of charge, is Funding Central, which is www.fundingcentral.org.uk. I will send the links through.
Should be on the list of websites I gave out.
Brilliant. Great. Yeah. The advantage of Funding Central is that it will actually, you can put in the nature of your organisation and you can ask for updates. So when funding flashes come out, so there's a new fund or an update to a fund, they will communicate that to you by email, basically. So it is an online service, so if you don't have access to email, that can be a bit tricky. But again, that's something, if you're working with an officer like myself, and we're aware of it, we know what the project's doing, we will send that information out to you. In Coventry, the City Council provides Grant Finder, and I think that's true in some of the other local authorities as well. And that's a free service, which is, again, you can access through them. What you end up with is a report. You set your criteria. So you identify the area you work in, the type of organisation you are, what your priorities are and what you're trying to achieve, what you need financially the money for, so the type of costs you go to incur. You click search and it automatically searches all the different trusts and foundations for you and comes back with a list. Now not all of those on that list will be appropriate for you, so you still have a bit of work to do in terms of searching through them, but it does make life a lot easier. And it's something I use all the time with groups. What we generally recommend is that you may come back with well over 160, 170 responses. We would recommend that you look at applying to no more than 10 organisations at a time. So you start with the 10 that are the best fit, then work your way backwards from there. But the key thing is don't apply to just one tree. Because if you're applying for something like the gentleman's spoke about the big lottery, how long did it take for your project in terms of the application coming through? In terms of your lottery project, how long was that the process?
8 years.
About 8
5,
years.
8 years.
So, in the interim, decision from reaching communities, it takes somewhere between 6 to 9 months, at least 6 to 9 months. That's on a good day. So, you know, don't just put all your eggs in one basket. Look at different funds. Because if you end up with more money than you need, you can use it for something different. And you can always discuss that and negotiate that with the funder. If they like your project and want to support you, they are more likely to be flexible in that sense. Yeah. 5 minutes, okay. Okay, so that's what Funding Central looks like. One of the biggest schemes, just quickly to cover, Groundwork in partnership with Tesco's have just, this is in the West Midlands, they're looking to pass out grants, 3 grants I think, one for 8,000, one for 10,000, one for 12,000. That is from the proceeds from the sale of plastic bags, which is 5p for every bag. So Tesco's, bless them, have actually agreed to provide that money to charity.
Not bless you, it's an advertising deal. 3 grants, well done there. 3 grants, and all the advertising they get out of 3 grants. Yeah.
But Sainsbury's aren't doing anything, as I understand it. They found a way of justifying not passing the money out. So that process, the deadline for that is very, very close from that point of view. So if you are looking at that, you need to be responding to that very, very quickly. It is. It will be a rolling programme, and it's managed by Groundwork in the West Midlands. So it is now open. This one is very exciting. This is Pocket Parks. They trialled this in London and are now rolling it out to the rest of the country. It is predominantly targeted at urban areas, so apologies to people from rural areas. You need to demonstrate that your area is ranked in terms of indices of multiple deprivation. The local authority or, again, funding advisor will help you with identifying that if needed. But their grants will be in the region of 10,000, and it's about, it has to be defined as a pocket park. On the website with the details, they actually define what a pocket park looks like, so they provide you with more information. There is funding available for capital, tree planting, landscaping, preparing a site, etc. But there's also resource funding or revenue funding available to buy in experts that you may need. You will need to, the big lottery, you can actually apply towards RUL if it's less than 10,000. They have a very specific outcome, which is around the environment. So their grants are between 3 to 10,000, and we will be providing you with the slides just in case you're noting it down. Sorry, it's a white cursor on the right screen, so it's a little difficult to... what they won't fund is activities that have already started. So they're looking for something that's project specific. They won't pay for development funding, but they will pay for the majority of project costs involved. So there's a whole list of what they don't fund. But what they're interested in, I think the key thing is, for a lot of groups that look at Wards Law, which is a relatively, if you're in Birmingham, you're virtually guaranteed to get money because that scheme is so undersubscribed in Birmingham. Birmingham at the moment is an area where most people are really, really concerned about. They're not getting their money out the door. So if you work in Birmingham, it's a really good time to be applying for funding. Most people look at improved rural and urban environments and focus on that as an outcome. But if you think about it, If you're bringing with volunteers, you're training them, you're providing them with skills, it's making them more employable. There's a whole range of skills involved in that. It brings communities together. If you think about your projects in those contexts, and as an outcome, you're actually bringing people together in a way that perhaps other schemes don't. And people outside means that they're actually healthier, they'll be more active as well. So that's really, really important. There's two main awards for all schemes, or big lottery schemes. Awards for all and reaching communities. You've also got a whole range of heritage schemes which will be appropriate for you. Startup grants, sharing heritage, Our Heritage, big heritage scheme. So Our Heritage is up to about 100,000. Over 100,000 pound schemes will be big heritage grants. There's also the specific Parks for People scheme. And there is a great report on that, which is ideal for you in terms of looking at that. But also if you're doing something with townscapes, you can look at that as well. So there's a whole range of information that I provide for you on the different schemes, which will be available to you. The landscape partnerships are much bigger. There are kind of 5 main landfill tax providers as well. Veolia, REN, BIFA Award, CETA, and there is Corrie Environmental, who works specifically in Dudley. So if you're in Dudley, and in the Himley area of Dudley, you have a very good chance of being successful, because that's the only area in the West Midlands that they fund. So if you're in Dudley, you have to be within 10 miles of the landfill site. The grants are on average up to about 50,000. But again, that scheme is under review by the government at the moment, which I don't think is necessarily known. The money from that scheme may not be there in the future. So if you are looking for landfill funding, you need to be doing something about it now. That is really, really important. The contact details of all the different providers are provided within the presentation. There may be some additional funds in Staffordshire. Just waiting for confirmation from some of the funds, and I'll send that through for you in terms of whether they're still taking applications at the moment. But there are 2 areas they look at. Biodiversity is one, and public amenities is the other. They do have what's called an admin charge, which is generally somewhere between 10 to 11%. If you go for a small grant for BIFA, it's only 3%. So there are different amounts of funding available from the different providers. But you can go back more than once, and this was something I was talking to Tim about. One of the things people don't realise is that if you phase the works, you can actually do the works in a phase basis and have multiple applications over a number of years. So I'm sorry, it's a whistle start tour. There is a lot more, there's a lot of funds out there that are relevant for you. I think the key thing is there are people like myself set out there whose job it is to actually support you to achieve all of these things here. So, you know, if there is more information we are there. Generally our services are provided free of charge. We do provide some pay-for services where we develop these for you. We also run training sessions where we cover this. Normally this is kind of like a day session. So we're doing a very, very sort of condensed version for you today. But you can, my contact details will be provided. Obviously what I'll do is I'll provide a list of all the contact details of my equipment in the areas we all know. So I hope that's helpful. I'm sorry I can't cover it in more detail for you, but the key thing is we're here. Please do use us.
Thank you very much, Simon. Sorry to push you on there, Simon. Like I said, I will make sure I've gathered all the information and I will be sending it out to everybody. So you will get a copy of Simon's presentation. Wonderful. Okay, so moving on, we're going to get back together into discussion groups. Same discussion group leaders in the same places, but it would be nice if we could go and jump into a different one maybe this time. Squash around a bit, be with some new people. Now, the reason for this discussion is we've got to look now at how we want to run this network. We're together now, we're just getting it started. What we've got to think of, what do we want out of this network? Do we want to meet regularly? How do we want to do that? Do we want to maybe have someone send out information via newsletters to people? What is it we want to do? In the Northwest, they've got one set up. They meet when they find funding and do like a workshop occasionally. But what they normally do is there's 2 or 3 people from a few forums who come together and they send out regular information to the network. So we've got to decide, how's the West Midlands going to run? What does it need, how it's going to run is the first question. And the second